Imagine someone walks up and just hands you a set of blueprints.
Okay.
And they tell you, like, hey, these blueprints right here, they outline the construction of a fully functional, infinitely sustainable nuclear fusion reactor.
Oh, wow. Big claim.
Right. Huge claim. But there is a catch. The document is, 1,400 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And it was written by someone living in the middle of a desert.
Right.
So what is your first instinct? Like, what do you do with that? Do you sit there and analyze the elegance of the handwriting?
Definitely not.
Do you critique, I don't know, the poetic flow of the language? Or frame it and hang it on a wall as this beautiful piece of ancient mythology?
No, I mean, you take the blueprint straight into a lab.
Exactly. You take it to the lab and you ask a single, absolutely ruthless question. Do the physics actually work?
Right. You don't care if it's poetry. You care if the engineering holds up under stress.
Because, well, you don't invent the laws of physics.
No, you discover them. I mean, if the schematics actually produce fusion, the historical context of the author it becomes entirely secondary to the structural reality of the code.
Today, we are taking a very specific set of blueprints into the lab. Welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are looking at a text that has been shrouded in centuries of mysticism. It's been treated as a religious liturgy, boxed into this category of ancient artifacts.
Yeah, placed on a very high, untouchable shelf.
Right. Specifically, we're examining the opening verses of a chapter of the Quran, Surah As-Sajdah, chapter 32, verses 1 through 4.
And we really need to set the ground rules for the listener right out of the gate here.
Please do.
We are not doing theology today.
Absolutely not.
We are not interested in religious sentimentality. We are not doing flowery metaphors. We are approaching this text strictly as, well, master sociologists and systems engineers.
Right. We are looking at it as a foundational blueprint for civilizational design, period.
Because stripping away that sentimental lens is, honestly, it's the only way to genuinely interact with the structural claims being made here.
Yeah.
When you peel back the traditional mystical interpretations, what actually emerges is this assertion of an internally consistent, unbending law of cause and effect.
It's not a lullaby.
No. It isn't offering a comforting lullaby about the afterlife. It's claiming to define the raw operational physics of human society, like a literal civilizational operating system.
Which brings us to the core myth we are going to explode today, the whole discovery versus invention paradigm.
Oh, this is massive.
Because for centuries, the debate around this text has been completely misaligned. I mean, fundamentally, you have the critics who say, well, a man named Muhammad invented this text, he composed it.
Right.
And then the traditional defenders push back and they say, no human could have written something this eloquent. It's a literary miracle.
Which is such a weak defense, systemically speaking.
Exactly. Because from the perspective of our sources today, specifically looking through the analytical framework of thinkers like Parwez, both sides are having the exact wrong argument.
Yeah, they're having an aesthetic argument when the text itself is demanding a structural one.
Right.
The defense against invention isn't about poetic beauty. The opening verses of Surah As-Sajdah are asserting that a human being simply cannot invent a universal law of cause and effect.
Not at a civilizational scale.
Exactly. I mean, sure, a human can invent a political theory or, a temporary set of laws for a specific country, but they cannot invent the underlying sociological gravity that governs all human development.
You can't invent gravity, you can only map it.
You map it, you discover it.
So by the time we finish this deep dive, you, the listener, are going to understand how this ancient text lays down the ultimate inescapable meritocracy.
It defines the exact mechanics of consequence.
Yeah, and maybe most importantly, you're going to see why every single society throughout human history fundamentally tries and ultimately fails to bypass this very system.
To really understand the mechanics here, we have to establish the baseline. What is the specific psychological and social environment this text claims to produce?
Right. What's the output of the code?
Exactly. And we find this immediately in verse 2. It reads, "The revelation of the book, in which there is no doubt, is from the Lord of the worlds."
Okay. Let's put a massive magnifying glass on that phrase, in which there is no doubt.
Yes. The Arabic phrase there is la riba fi.
Now see, as someone reading English translations, my brain automatically equates the word doubt with a simple lack of information.
Like an intellectual guess.
Right. Like, I doubt it's going to rain tomorrow. Or, I doubt I have enough milk in the fridge for my coffee.
It's a mental coin toss.
Exactly. But the Arabic language is intensely precise. If the text wanted to describe that kind of ordinary intellectual uncertainty, it would have used a totally different word.
It would have used the word shack.
Shack, but it doesn't. It deliberately avoids shack and uses rabe.
Because the distinction between shack and rabe is, it's the difference between a passing thought and a psychological earthquake.
Oh man, tell me about it.
Rabe is not an intellectual puzzle. It is an agonizing, visceral uncertainty that causes severe internal turmoil.
Right.
Our source material provides this brilliant analogy to isolate this exact feeling.
The Studer analogy. I love this.
Right. So imagine you are listening to the radio and you hear a news report that a terrible accident just occurred downtown involving a red scooter.
Okay.
Now, if you don't know anyone who rides a red scooter, you might feel a fleeting sense of empathy or, some intellectual curiosity about traffic safety.
Right, that's shack.
That is shack.
Yeah.
But let's change the variables.
Yeah.
Let's say your teenager rides a red scooter and they left for downtown an hour ago and you are calling their phone right now and it is going straight to voicemail.
Wow, yeah.
That heart-stopping, terrifying, cold sweat panic, the absolute inability to know the status of your reality in that specific moment. That is rabe.
That is heavy. It's psychological distress born from systemic unpredictability.
Exactly.
And when you apply that concept to a civilizational scale, the implications are staggering. Because when the text asserts there is no rave in this system, it isn't just saying, hey, this book is factually accurate.
No, it is claiming to provide a structural cure for civilizational anxiety.
Right. Think about your own life right now as a listener. Think about the anxiety you feel when the economy just wildly shifts for reasons nobody can seem to explain.
Or when an opaque algorithm dictates whether your small business even survives the month.
Yes. Or consider living under a volatile dictatorship, where the laws change depending on what the ruling class had for breakfast.
You wake up not knowing if your property will be seized, or if some previously innocent action is suddenly a crime.
That agonizing unpredictability, that fear, that is the sociological manifestation of rabe.
And under those conditions, long-term human development completely freezes. Trust dissolves.
Because you can't build.
You can't. A society cannot build a sustainable future if the foundation is constantly shifting beneath its feet. So the text here is laying down a massive claim. It is providing an objective, unshifting foundation.
It's claiming to replace the terrifying uncertainty of a subjective, personality-driven world with a permanent, objective law.
It establishes a reliable baseline. Action A will always equal consequence B, period.
Okay, so it establishes that it cures civilizational anxiety by giving us this stable baseline. But then it immediately defines the operational boundaries of this baseline.
Right, with the phrase Rabb-il-Aalameen.
Which is traditionally translated as Lord of the Worlds.
And this is where the traditional interpretation often severely limits the text.
I'm going to play the skeptic here for a second.
Go for it.
Because when I hear Lord of the Worlds, my brain immediately goes to a very primitive territorial concept.
Right, like a feudal lord.
Yeah. It sounds like a cosmic real estate owner.
Yeah.
The king who owns the land of Earth, the land of Mars, and, whatever else is out there. How do you logically leap from a medieval-sounding title like Lord of the Worlds to this hyper-modern idea of a universal source code? Aren't we just reverse engineering modern tech jargon onto an ancient text to make it sound cool?
That is a vital question, and it requires us to look at how humans project their own limitations onto the infinite.
Okay, explain that.
So, primitive human societies function purely on resource scarcity and territorial control.
Right.
If you were a king, your power ended exactly where your land ended.
Right, you hit the border, you're out of power.
Exactly. Because that was the only model of authority ancient humans understood, they naturally projected that model onto the concept of a creator. They imagined a bigger king with more land.
Just a guy with a bigger map.
Exactly. But the systemic analysis of Rabb-il-Aalameen, it completely shatters that territorial limitation. Because the word Alameen doesn't mean plots of land.
Right.
It means worlds, domains, or systems.
Oh. So it's a scope claim.
It is entirely a scope claim. It defines the operational boundaries of the law being presented. When the text says it is from the Lord of all systems, it is declaring that the productive developmental law articulated here is unconditional.
So it's not localized.
No, it's not localized to the tribal dynamics of the Arabian Peninsula. It's not restricted to the economic realities of the 7th century. It operates across all biological, psychological, and sociological systems uniformly.
Let me ground this for the listener real quick.
Yeah.
Because it's like gravity.
Yes.
Gravity doesn't care if you were dropping a stone from a ziggurat in ancient Babylon or if you're dropping a smartphone from a skyscraper in modern-day Tokyo.
It pulls everything down at 9.8 meters per second squared.
Right. The hardware changes, the culture changes, the tech changes, but the code executes the exact same way. That is what this text is asserting about human society.
And that means the credibility of the Quran, when you view it through this systemic lens, it doesn't rest on whether you believe in a mystical, unseen being sitting in the clouds.
Thank goodness.
Right. Its credibility rests entirely on a testable proposition. Do the sociological and historical laws it describes actually operate that way in the real world?
Can you observe the consequences it predicts?
Yes. Surah 32 opens by formally entering that massive claim onto the record.
Which naturally leads to the immediate rational pushback.
Of course it does.
Because if someone walks into a room and says, hey, I have the universal source code for human society, it operates everywhere and there are absolutely no bugs in it,
you're going to ask questions.
The very first question any critically thinking person asks is, wait, who wrote this code? Did you just make this up?
Because the human mind is inherently skeptical of absolute claims, and rightfully so. Our entire experience is based on fallible human interactions. We know people lie.
We know people invent stories to gain power.
Exactly.
And the text anticipates this exact skepticism in verse 3. It literally asks, or do they say he invented it? And this brings us back to that invention fallacy. Because the traditional defense, like we said earlier, is aesthetic. They just say, look at the poetry. A 7th century merchant could never write something so beautiful.
But Parwez's analysis points out that the text itself is not making a literary argument at all. It's making an argument about the nature of absolute truth versus relative truth.
Okay, unpack that. Relative versus absolute.
Well, human thought is, by its very definition, constrained. Any truth posited by a human being is relative to their time in history.
Right.
It's relative to their spatial geometry, their cultural biases, their socioeconomic status. Think about the greatest political documents in human history.
Like the Constitution.
Right. They are brilliant, but they are patched. They require amendments because the human authors had massive blind spots. They couldn't foresee future economic models or technological shifts.
They didn't know about the internet.
Exactly. A human being can invent a highly effective political theory for their specific era, but a human cannot invent al-haq.
Al-haq, the absolute truth. Objective reality.
You do not invent objective reality. You map it. The text contrasts the relative, subjective nature of human invention with the absolute, objective nature of universal law.
Because if this operating system were invented by a human, it would inherently contain the biases of that human.
It would decay over time as society evolved past the author's original framework. The assertion here is that it does not decay because it was mapped, not composed.
And the historical context provided by our source material here is, it's absolutely fascinating because it provides a massive data point to support this structural claim.
The environment where it emerged.
Right. If we look at the environment where this text emerged, the 7th century Arabian Peninsula, we are looking at a complete historical anomaly. It was a vacuum.
A total vacuum of systemic philosophical infrastructure.
The Arab societies of that era claimed absolutely no prophetic history between Ismail or Abraham and the arrival of this specific text. For thousands of years, just silent.
Unbroken silence. There were no continuous academies of systemic philosophy, no deeply rooted infrastructure of divine law.
No template whatsoever for building a comprehensive civilizational code.
And I want you to think about how rare that is sociologically. Whenever ancient cultures wanted to legitimize their social structures, they almost always invented a lineage of divine authority.
Always.
The source material compares this Arab vacuum to ancient Hindu traditions. In those traditions, the societal architects mapped avatars back millions of years.
Wow.
They constructed an incredibly elaborate, unbroken chain of divine intervention to validate their specific societal designs, like the caste system.
They needed the weight of manufactured history.
Right. They needed it to make their subjective laws feel objective. It is a standard sociological mechanism for consolidating power. You invent a mythological past to control the present.
But the Arabs didn't even try to do that.
No.
They had no fake lineage. They had a total blank slate. So if we look at the invention theory purely through the lens of civilizational design, it completely collapses under its own weight.
It makes no sense.
If you have a society with zero historical infrastructure, Zero template for complex divine laws. Zero tradition of massive systemic philosophy.
And suddenly, out of a complete vacuum.
Right. That environment just happens to produce the most perfectly balanced, universally applicable sociological code. The idea that it was a local ad hoc invention, it defies every known pattern of human development.
Returning to your earlier analogy, it would be exactly like finding a fully functional quantum computer buried in the middle of a Bronze Age archaeological dig.
Yes.
You wouldn't look at the quantum processor and say, wow, the local blacksmith must have had a really creative weekend playing with copper and stone.
You would know immediately it doesn't belong there.
You would recognize that the object is not a product of its immediate environment. It represents a sudden, vertical injection of objective knowledge that entirely transcends the local developmental timeline.
Okay, so having established that the law is a map discovery, an injection of objective reality rather than, a local invention, the text doesn't pause. It moves aggressively into outlining how the physical universe itself was constructed.
And in doing so, it systematically dismantles primitive human superstitions.
Oh, it really does. Let's look at the first part of verse 4. God is he who created the heavens and the earth and what is between them in 6 periods.
This is the famous concept of the 6 days of creation, which has been the source of immense theological confusion and scientific pushback.
And rightly so, because when people read 6 days, they picture a 24-hour solar cycle. They picture Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
Which is locically incoherent.
Totally.
A literal interpretation of a solar day in the context of universal creation just doesn't work. A solar day is a hyper-localized measurement. It relies on the rotation of a specific planet, the Earth, relative to a specific star, the Sun.
Right.
So how can you possibly have a 24-hour solar day before the Earth or the Sun are even fully formed?
You can't. And our source text ruthlessly strips away this mythological anthropomorphism, because the Arabic word utilized in the verse is Ayyam.
Yes.
While it's colloquially translated as days, its root meaning does not strictly denote a 24-hour period. It signifies stages or epochs, vast developmental periods.
It is a description of a phased developmental sequence. When the text asserts that the universe was created in 6 Ayyam, it aligns beautifully with the modern physicist's view of an evolving cosmos.
Not a magic trick.
Not a magic trick. Creation wasn't performed instantaneously by some cosmic wizard. It was a process governed by physical laws, evolving over unimaginable stretches of time.
Right, you have the initial expansion.
The period of rapid cooling, the formation of elemental gases, the slow accretion of stars, the coalescing of planets. It is a systemic evolution.
And the physical relativity embedded in this text is what truly blows my mind. The verse mentions creating the heavens and the earth, which in the Arabic are Sama and Aries.
And we have to bypass the colloquial translations again and examine the root linguistics to see the physics at play here.
The source highlights a deeply sophisticated nuance. Sama simply means heights, and Ars means depths.
Right.
It completely shatters the rigid, flat earth binary of, the sky is a blue dome up there and the dirt is flat down here.
It represents spatial relativity. It introduces the concept of the observer effect long before modern physics even had a word for it. Every Ars has a Sama, and every Sama has an Ars.
Let's picture this. Standing here on Earth, our Ars, we look up at the stars and call them the heavens. Our Sama.
Right.
But picture a hypothetical observer standing on a planet orbiting one of those stars millions of light years away, looking back through a telescope at us.
To them, we are the heavens.
We are their heights. The text recognized the relative dimensional nature of the cosmos 1,400 years ago. It's a deeply sophisticated understanding of spatial relationships that completely bypasses primitive cosmology.
And this level of sophistication is exactly why the text goes out of its way to explode another major mythological concept, one that actually still governs much of our modern calendar.
The Sabbath.
The idea of the Sabbath.
The Sabbath myth. Because the cultural concept of the weekend Saturday for Jewish traditions, Sunday for Christian traditions, is fundamentally rooted in a very specific narrative.
That the Creator made the universe in 6 days, got tired, and needed to rest on the 7th day.
Right. And this is the ultimate example of anthropomorphic projection. Human beings are projecting their own severe biological limitations onto the infinite reality of the universe.
Exactly. When humans work, our muscles build up lactic acid.
We get sore.
Our cellular energy depletes. Our brains require deep sleep cycles just to clear out metabolic waste. Because early humans couldn't conceive of an entity without a biological body, they assumed that building the universe must have been this exhausting physical labor.
Right, requiring the creator to literally sleep in on the weekend to recover. We turned the ultimate authority of the cosmos into a fatigued construction worker who needs a mandated union break.
It's absurd when you really break it down.
It is. And the text we're analyzing entirely rejects this concept of divine fatigue.
Mhm.
Now, I want to be clear, because the sociology here is really important. A mandated day of rest is a brilliant civilizational utility for humans.
We do need breaks.
We do. We build up lactic acid. We need breaks to prevent societal burnout. You need a day off to recover, to engage with your community, spend time with your family. Even the Quran has a chapter named Friday, Jumu'ah.
But the mechanism behind Jumu'ah is entirely logistical. It's not theological. The word translates roughly to the day of gathering or assembly.
The text essentially says, when the call is made, leave your business, gather together for community alignment, and then when it's done, disperse and go back to work.
It never says take the day off because the system operator is sleeping.
Right. It's about human social cohesion. Projecting human physical exhaustion onto the infinite architecture of reality is not just absurd, it is systemically dangerous.
It really is. It introduces a fatal flaw into the logic of how the universe operates. Because if the creator is fatigued and requires rest, we have to ask a terrifying question.
Who is running the universe on the seventh day?
Exactly. If the system can just run on autopilot while the operator takes a nap, then the operator is actually superfluous to the ongoing function of the system.
Which brings us directly into the second half of verse 4, dealing with the concept of operational governance.
Right.
The verse continues, then established himself on the throne. The Arabic is istawa alal arsh.
And if we lack linguistic discipline here, we fall right back into the anthropomorphic trap.
The big chair in the sky.
The immediate mental image is a giant king with a white beard sitting down on a massive wooden chair somewhere up in the stratosphere.
And mathematically and philosophically, that image is a complete disaster. If you place an infinite creator onto a physical chair, you have immediately restricted the infinite into finite constraints of time and space.
You've boxed it in.
Right. If he is on the chair, he is inherently not somewhere else. You have localized the system administrator, which breaks the premise of universal governance.
But the source text meticulously dismantles this imagery. In Arabic linguistics, an arsh does not mean a piece of furniture.
Okay.
It signifies the central controlling authority, the operational command center. It's the nexus of power. And istawa does not mean the physical act of sitting down.
What does it mean?
It implies achieving perfect equilibrium, unwavering stabilization, and perfectly balanced control over a domain.
So it's not a king resting his legs. It's the operational governance of a massive system running flawlessly. The system is maintained by active design.
Yes. And this specific phrasing addresses a massive philosophical debate that dominated European secular and scientific circles for centuries.
During the Enlightenment, right.
Exactly. The source text explicitly references this era, bringing up the physics of James Jeans and Isaac Newton. This is the debate over the clockwork universe.
The rise of deism.
Yes. So during the Industrial Revolution, scientists began mapping the fixed laws of physics. Newtonian mechanics, predictable planetary orbits, thermodynamics.
Right, they figured out the math.
They realized the universe ran with the precision of a giant, perfect machine. However, they couldn't reconcile this with the erratic, interventionist God described in their traditional theologies.
The God who gets angry and changes his mind.
Right. So they compromised. They concluded that God was like a master clockmaker. He built the intricate machinery of the universe, wound it up with a massive initial burst of energy, threw away the key, and walked away.
So the universe is just running blindly on its initial momentum, an abandoned mechanism.
The deist view assumes God is entirely uninvolved in the day-to-day operations. The text we are analyzing completely and fundamentally contrasts with that European secular fallacy. When the Quran says, istawa alal arsh, it is asserting active, real-time, continuous governance.
Let's dig into why that difference matters to the listener. Because it's not just an academic debate. Why is the clockwork universe dangerous sociologically?
Because the universe is just a wound-up clock left to run down. It means the system is subject to entropy without oversight. It means the laws of cause and effect might degrade over time. It creates the possibility of blind spots, anomalies, and loopholes. But if the system is under active, perfectly balanced, real-time governance, it means the law is not a historical relic. It is not slowly winding down. It is a live, humming engine.
The laws are constantly executing.
Always.
I mean, if the governance of gravity stopped being actively enforced for 1 millisecond, the entire cosmos would fly apart. Every time you make a choice, you are not interacting with an abandoned machine. You are inputting data into a live system that is actively computing the output based on unbreakable laws.
Which brings us to the absolute core of our analysis today.
Yes.
If the universe is an active, heavily governed system with no fatigue, no localized limitations, and absolutely zero blind spots, how do we, as human beings, interface with it without being crushed by the rules?
Well, we survive it by facing the mathematical consequences of our actions, without exception. This is the final devastating part of verse 4. It says, "You have no protector or intercessor besides him."
This is the most critical structural reframing of our entire deep dive, because this verse permanently closes the ultimate bypass.
The bypass. Human beings are fundamentally averse to facing the music. Every failing civilization in history tries to invent a bypass to the law of cause and effect.
Always.
If I do something wrong, or if I want a status or a resource that I haven't earned through merit, I do not want to rely on an objective, unbreakable law. I want a shortcut. I want a backdoor into the system.
And societies invariably construct these backdoors. They invent intercessors. Historically, these were the priests who claimed they could speak to the unseen forces on your behalf.
Provided you paid them the right tithe, of course.
Naturally. Or it was kings who claimed a divine right to alter the law to protect their loyalists. Today, the intercessors look different. It might be the political elite, corporate lobbyists, or opaque algorithms tuned to favor certain classes over others.
Right.
But the mechanism is always the same. A powerful entity claiming they can stand between the individual and the objective consequences of the individual's actions.
The source text uses a highly culturally relevant term to describe this decaying societal mechanic, Sifarish.
Sifarish.
It translates to nepotism, bribery, or the act of, pulling strings. Think about how a deeply corrupt society functions. It runs entirely on Sifarish. If you get a severe speeding ticket, you don't go to court and face the fine based on the evidence.
No, you call your uncle who plays golf with the police chief.
Exactly. If you want a lucrative government contract, you don't spend months submitting the most efficient, cost-effective proposal. You take the procurement minister out to an expensive dinner.
Sifarish is the ultimate indicator of a dying system. It signifies that objective laws have become meaningless, and the only metric that matters is your proximity to power. It is the literal death of merit.
Now take that corrupt human tendency for nepotism and apply it to theology. This is where the source text completely obliterates a shocking perversion of justice that has infiltrated almost every major religious tradition.
The belief in intercession.
Right. The deeply ingrained belief in a wali, a protector, or a shafi, an intercessor.
The mythological view of intercession paints a very specific picture of the ultimate reckoning. The belief is that on the Day of Judgment, a highly elevated holy figure, a prophet, a saint, a spiritual leader, will literally cry, beg, and plead with God to pull their specific followers out of hell.
The mental image is literally, "Please God, I know this person was terrible. I know they exploited the poor. I know they lied, they cheated, they destroyed communities. But they belong to my group.
Right. They wore our symbols.
So do me a solid, ignore the evidence, and let them into paradise."
And the traditional narrative suggests that God, swayed by the tears of the VIP, just overrides the scales of justice and grants a pardon.
It makes my skin crawl when you lay it out like that. I want you, the listener, to really think about what that scenario implies.
Let's hear it.
If a human judge in your local courthouse pardoned a guilty, unrepentant corporate embezzler simply because a famous politician walked into the courtroom and asked for a personal favor, we would riot. We would call that judge fundamentally corrupt. We would demand they be disbarred for destroying the rule of law. Yet, traditional theology takes that exact same model of blatant corruption and projects it onto the ultimate authority of the universe.
It completely and utterly destroys the concept of a merit-based order. A meritocracy cannot survive if nepotism is permitted at the highest level of the system.
It's impossible.
If the ultimate foundational law of reality can be bypassed simply because you know the right guy, then the entire concept of cause and effect is a joke.
But the text puts a hard stop to it.
Yeah.
You have no protector or intercessor besides him. There is no bypass. You cannot pull strings with the source code of reality. The system does not care who you know.
But we must be exceptionally precise here because linguistic discipline is paramount. The text does use the word shafi in other contexts throughout the Quran, a word that translators almost universally render as intercessor.
Right, which causes confusion.
Huge confusion. But our source material corrects this massive and dangerous misunderstanding by examining the Arabic legal terminology of the time.
Right, because the Quran frequently utilizes the legal terminology of 7th century commerce and law to paint a picture of an ultimate inescapable courtroom.
Exactly. In pure Arabic legal terms, a shafi is absolutely not a corrupt politician pulling strings behind closed doors. A shafi is a true objective defense witness.
Break that difference down clearly for us. Walk us through the mechanics of the courtroom.
Okay, imagine you are on trial for a serious crime. An intercessor, in the corrupt Sifarish sense, is someone who bypasses the trial entirely. They walk up to the judge's bench and whisper, "Ignore the forensics, ignore the victims, let him go because he is my friend."
Corrupt.
Corrupt. A shafi, in the pure Arabic legal sense, operates entirely within the boundaries of objective justice. They are a witness to the truth.
Right.
They stand by the accused in open court and provide factual, verifiable testimony. They might present evidence stating, "I have forensic proof he was not at the scene of the crime," or "Here is the documentation proving he acted in self-defense."
So they assist the court in establishing the objective truth. They do not ask the judge to ignore the truth.
Precisely. They do not request a violation of the law. They ensure the law is applied based on complete and accurate data. The Quran's concept of the ultimate reckoning is a perfectly fair trial. You are permitted to present your evidence.
The true context of your actions is taken into account.
Yes. But the final judgment is entirely, 100%, based on the objective law of cause and effect. Nobody is asking the system to break its own rules for you.
Because the rules are structurally unbreakable. This brings us to the profound concept of Mukafat-e-Amal, the law of requital. It is the inescapable court of cause and effect.
Unescapable.
In this system, every single action you take, down to the atomic level, generates an exact proportional reaction. As the broader text states elsewhere, whoever does an atom's weight of good will see it, and whoever does an atom's weight of evil will see it.
It is a terrifying level of accountability, but it is simultaneously the ultimate form of human empowerment. Ignorance of the law is no excuse, because the law is written into the fabric of reality.
You can't plead ignorance.
No. In this systemic court, the source text describes your book, your ledger of actions, as being tied to your neck. You do not need an external jury. You are your own judge.
The feedback loop is flawlessly objective. The text uses vivid, almost surreal metaphors to describe this absolute accountability. It says, your hands, your feet, your tongue will testify against you.
Which, again, requires us to step away from literal mythological readings. This isn't about severed body parts magically growing mouths and speaking in a courtroom.
Right, it's not a horror movie.
It is a profound description of physiological and psychological consequence. It means your actions leave undeniable physical markers in the real world.
If you build a life on exploitation, the objective reality of that exploitation is recorded in the system. The damage to your community is a physical record. The psychological decay of your own empathy is a physical record mapped in your neural pathways.
You can't hide it.
You cannot lie your way out of it through a slick PR campaign or a desperate plea to a patron saint, because your very existence, your physical and mental state, bears witness to exactly what you have done.
If you desire success in this system, there is only one viable path. You must align your daily actions with the developmental laws of the universe. You cannot bribe the code.
No.
You cannot cry to an intercessor to change the physics of reality on your behalf. You must build according to the blueprint.
Let's synthesize all of this, because we have covered a massive amount of philosophical and structural ground today.
We really have.
We've completely reframed the first 4 verses of Surah As-Sajdah. We started with the blueprints, and we ended in the inescapable courtroom.
The overarching theme that binds these 4 verses together is the interplay of permanence and change. The permanent principle, the absolute truth, or al-haqi, is that this productive civilizational law was discovered, not invented.
It provides a baseline that cures the anxiety of Rabb.
Yes. It operates across all biological and sociological systems without exception. And it functions without any backdoors, without any loopholes, and without any corrupt intercessors. That is the permanent, unchanging reality of the operational system.
But what does change is the human reaction to that system. What changes is the historical mask of the bypass.
The mask is always changing.
Every era of human history invents a new mask for who supposedly controls the outcomes, desperately trying to hide from the law of requital. In the Bronze Age, the mask was the divine right of kings, the idea that the monarch was immune to consequence.
Right. And in the Middle Ages, the mask was the priesthood selling indulgences, literally buying a bypass for your sins.
In our modern era, the masks are far more sophisticated, but the mechanism of avoidance is identical. We might place our faith in the unchecked belief that market forces will magically correct all of our moral and ecological failures without us having to change our behavior.
Or we rely on a specific political party to shield our demographic from the consequences of our collective actions.
Or we bite into the delusion that a meticulously crafted personal brand or algorithmic influence can somehow rewrite objective reality. We think if we get enough likes, the truth of our actions stops mattering.
The bypass constantly changes its face.
But the text's assertion remains utterly identical across 14 centuries. The operating system of the universe is entirely law-based. It is never personality-based. Verses 1 through 4 are the opening credentials of a system that does not need a human author to validate it.
Because it proves its own truth by perfectly describing the harsh, unyielding, and beautifully just reality we all live in.
It demands that we look critically at our own societies and ask a terrifying question. Are we building our institutions on the bedrock of objective law, or are we building on a fragile, decaying network of Sifarish nepotism and illusions?
And honestly, accepting the reality of the blueprint changes everything about how we build.
Which brings me to the final thought I want to leave you with today. We have spent this deep dive deconstructing the idea that the universe has absolutely no backdoors. But I want you to apply that to your own life, your own neighborhood, your own community.
Take it out of the abstract.
Exactly. If we truly fundamentally accepted that the universe operates this way, that no connection, no social status, no amount of hoarded wealth, and no amount of pleading could save us from the exact mathematical, sociological consequences of our actions, how would we design our communities tomorrow morning?
It's a profound question.
What would our criminal justice system look like if it couldn't be manipulated by wealth? What would our economy look like if exploitation inherently destroyed the exploiter? If you knew with absolute certainty that you couldn't pull a string to get across the river, how hard would you work to actually build a bridge?
It forces total accountability.
It really does. Thank you for joining us on this intellectual journey today. This has been a masterclass in stripping away the artifacts of the past to see the raw systemic reality underneath. We will see you on the next deep dive.